I will shout and sing, standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises that cannot fail. When the howling storms of doubt and fear assail, by the living word of God I shall prevail. Standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of Christ the Lord, bound to Him eternal in His love's strong cord, overcoming daily with the Spirit's sword. Standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises that cannot fail. Listening every moment to the Spirit's call. Resting in my Savior as my all in all. Standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing on the promises, standing on the promises. I'm standing on the promises of God.
Turn one page back to 338. This will be the offertory. 338, Wonderful Words of Life.
Sing them over again to me, wonderful words of life. Let me more of their beauty see, wonderful words of life. Words of life and beauty, teach me faith and duty. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Christ the Blessed One gives to all wonderful words of life. Sinners listen to the loving call, wonderful words of life. All so freely given, wooing us to heaven. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Sweetly echo the gospel call,
53.
I know not why God's wondrous grace to me He hath made known, nor why unworthy Christ in love redeemed me for His own. But I know whom I am believing, and am persuaded that He is able to keep that which I committed unto Him against that day. I know not how this saving faith to me He did impart, nor how believing in His word brought peace within my heart. But I know whom I am believing, and am persuaded that He is able to keep that which I committed unto Him against that day. I know not how the Spirit moves, convincing men of sin, revealing Jesus through the Word, creating faith in men. But I know whom I am believing, and am persuaded that He is able to keep that which I committed unto Him against that day. I know not when my Lord may come at night or noonday fair, nor if I walk the vale with Him or meet Him in the air. But I know whom I am believing, and am persuaded that He is able to keep that which I committed unto Him against that day.
Choir's going to sing, I will sing the wondrous song. We're going to do 1, 2, and 5.
I will sing the wonder story of the Christ who died for me, how He left His home in glory for the cross of Calvary. Yes, I'll sing the wonder story of the Christ who died for me, Sing it with the saints in glory, gathered by the crystal sea. I was lost, but Jesus found me, found the sheep that went astray. Threw His loving arms around me, drew me back into His way. Yes, I'll sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Sing it with the saints in glory, gathered by the crystal sea. He will keep me till the river rolls its waters at my feet. Then He'll bear me safely over where the loved ones I shall meet. Yes, I'll sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Sing it with the saints in glory, gathered by the crystal sea.
Thank you, choir musicians. Thank you all. What a wonderful, wonderful day it is to be in the Lord's house. Isn't it great to be in God's house today? Amen? That's what I'm talking about. Come on, look up. It's a great day. It's a beautiful day. You know, Bible school brings things to mind and things that you encounter every day. I was thinking today about a little essay we had to write when I was in a religious studies class over at the university. He told us to find something in nature that reminded you of yourself. And boy, I was just kind of, man, I was thinking about monkeys and everything else, but I finally found something I could bring to class. I found a little rock about so big. And you've seen these old sand rocks, you know, it's got other little rocks integrated into it. It looks sort of like a bumpy lemon or something, you know, it got little rocks all in it. And I, you know, it just kind of hit me, so I brought it and said, wrote my essay on, this is a conglomeration, and I am a conglomerate of everything that I go through every day. Other little things stick to us all the time. You know, it's amazing how things like that do. They kind of get in your mind, and you kind of, as you roll along, you kind of pick up this over here and that over there, and things just kind of stick to you, and they become a part of who you are. And it brought back when I was in watching the Bible school kids and thinking about this week. You know, the kids are fixing to go back to school, and I think so much of our children, because there's so much there in my heart, and I know in yours. When I was growing up, so many things that I remember of my childhood, and I was just thinking about a few kids in particular that I knew who were here during Bible school, and some of the prayers that I prayed for them and all of that. Old Solomon must have been, when he was writing the Proverbs, I kind of thought of a story I'd heard one time, and it may or may not be true, probably touches close. Solomon, of course, was the wealthiest king ever of Israel. I mean, David was wealthy, but Solomon even more so. And Solomon had all of his home in the palace and all this wonderful, lush living that he did in luxury. Had all these concubines and everything. Boy, he just, if any man had looked at him and they would have thought, boy, this guy has got it made, man. He is living the life. But I heard a story of a preacher tell one time who said he was like, he might have got restless one night and kind of walking down the street, decided he'd just go kind of take in a little night air, and he could see this group over here and that family over there. And back in those days, of course, it was hot. The doors would be open, the windows would be open. He could see the families milling about inside, and he might have seen a scene as he walked down that street. The Bible tells us Solomon had a restless life. He had a life that, though he was living in luxury, he was a pretty miserable man, really, when it all came down to it. And I can only imagine old Solomon kind of going back to the palace and maybe remembering some of those families who didn't have any of the luxuries that he had. Kind of sitting around the table at night, eating their supper together and laughing together and loving the family, and how wonderful it might have been. He might have picked up on something when he wrote down in the book of Proverbs, chapter 15, verse 17. In Proverbs 15:17, Solomon said this: better is a dinner of herbs. Now, herbs here literally means vegetables, you know, peas and corn and okra, like I like so well. But better is a dinner of just vegetables, where love is, than stalled ox and hatred therewith. In other words, than a filet mignon steak, where hatred is. You think about that, what a statement, but how true it is. Today I want to talk about something that had been on my mind this week, because I guess of all the other things that I've just kind of picked up along the way in my life lately. Looking at kids, thinking about these kids, thinking about what they're about to do, going back to school, and all the things that they're going to face. I don't know what goes through the minds of any child, but it brought back so many memories of some things that went through my mind as a child, and some of the things that I saw. And I remember now today, as I look at it, these children, and speaking to them and hearing them and seeing them, seeing in their faces and in their eyes, and knowing their family's lifestyle, their family's history, and some of the things that they face at home. Let me ask you something. Who is responsible for our children's future? Who is responsible? As our kids go back to school, who's responsible for seeing that our children, and remember, as I emphasize, our children, your kids may already be going back to school. You may just have kids or grandkids, or you may have no kids necessarily in your home or around you there, close and tight, but we're all responsible, aren't we? We're all responsible as our kids go back to school to make sure that they know that we love them. A few of the things that I thought about, one of the things in particular, is if I was a child today, what would I want my adults in my life to be like? What would I like for them to do? What would I want from them? What would I want them to do? In 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8, Paul, writing to Timothy, gave Timothy some wonderful words of advice. But one of the things that he spoke that has always stuck with me, and it's one of the verses of Scripture that we think of quite often, and I know most of you probably know it by heart, but in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8, Paul told Timothy, if any, that means if anyone, provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, then he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. Now, your first thoughts are what? If you don't provide them food on the table and a dry home and warm place to live and place to sleep, yeah, that's true enough. All of those things, you got to furnish your family and your food and your vehicles and all of those things. But you know what came to my mind this time when I read it in preparation for today? What came to my mind was this: get this and get it good, all right? The one thing that we need to provide for our children, for our family, for our household, for our even our extended family, our church family and all others, the one thing that we need to provide above everything else is love. Love. And if a man or woman does not provide for their household love, then what else? I read a saying and I wrote it down. I got it this way. Listen, in pursuit of the things money can buy, don't forget the things money can't buy. Because those can be the most important thing, can't they? The things that money can't buy can become the best. The simplest home, no matter what it is. We all like to say, Mr. Turk, you say I live up on Poverty Ridge. Of course, we all knew better than that, but he'd smile when he said it. But we all know what it's like to live in a home that doesn't have all the luxuries that others have. We know all of these folks that we see on TV, and sometimes I don't know why we think, boy, I wish I had something like that. I really don't. I really don't, because to me the simplest house, the simplest home is a home where love lives, where happiness lives, where contention is not welcome. What would I want? What would I want if I were a child today? If I lived in this world right now as a child, what would I want out of you, adults? What would I want out of my parents? And the first thing I really wrote down first, that really came to mind first and foremost of everything else. And I know I would want them to know God and to teach me of God. We'll get to that in a moment. But the first thing I wrote down is that I would want to know that my parents are always on my side. Now listen, y'all don't take that the wrong way. I'm not saying that I wouldn't discipline them at all, because that's not even remotely what I'm talking about. I'd want to know that above everything else, I could count on my parents. I could count on the adults in my life, whether they be my parents, my grandparents, my uncles and aunts, or cousins. I'd want to know that I could depend on them, that I could lean on them, that I could always run to them, that I could always know that when I got to them, I was going to find love. I was going to find somebody that would stand with me and stand up for me. We go to the altar and we'll say at the altar, I promise for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, and all of that's important at the altar. But it's even more important at the cradle. We ought to be able to look into that cradle of that child and say, for better or worse, I commit myself to you, no matter what life throws at us, whether it's bad or good or whether it's worse or better. When we talk to you kids sometimes, I know how easy it is. Davine and I haven't had any kids of our own, but trust me, we have had plenty of opportunity to interact. And it's easy to get impatient with your kids. It's easy to get impatient and just say, oh, and just give them a ball and out or throw them out the yard and tell them to come back after a while. It's easy to get impatient. But what I would want what I would want as a child from those people who were my family, I would want them to have enough patience to be sure that when they spoke their wisdom to me, that they did it after having given it careful thought and consideration, to know that they had enough patience to sit down with me and give me some of their time rather than just telling me to get on out of the way and get out from underfoot. Oh, yes, I can tell you of some parents that I see that just literally get on out of here. Get out of my way. Don't ever do that to your children. Oh, yeah, it's all right to tell them to go play a while, and I'll talk to you in a few minutes. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about having the old impatient attitude toward your children that doesn't have time to spend with them and give to them the advice and the guidance that they need. Don't let impatience, don't let temper, short temper, knee-jerk, don't let that be a part of your relationship between you and your children. And another thing that I've seen that I couldn't help but jot down is never, ever, ever, never, ever call your children dumb or stupid. Don't ever tell them they're dumb. Don't ever tell, what you tell them, they're going to believe you. And when you tell them things like that, when you get impatient with them when they're trying to study, when they're trying to learn something, or they're having trouble in a classroom, don't ever tell them, you're too dumb to get this. Or why didn't the Lord give you a little more sense? Don't do that. Instead, be positive with them and give them encouragement to say, hey, we'll get this. Come on, together we'll get it, or we'll find somebody that can help you get this. Don't ever let that be a part of your conversations with your children. Always let your conversations be and wind up being positive, especially toward their future and toward who they are and what they're going to do and where they're going to go and what they're going to be. This one is very important to me. Sticks and stones may break my bones. But what did we say as children? But words will never hurt me. Oh, let's get it right. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but your words will always harm me forever. Be careful, choose carefully the words that you use when talking to your children. Don't ever threaten your kids with God. What does that mean? That means don't ever say, God's going to get you for this. You know, God's going to judge you for this. God's going to punish you for this. Always show God to them in a positive, upbeat, loving way. God's going to take care of you. God's going to help you get through this. God's going to guide you through this, whether it be their schoolwork or whether it be situations that they get into at the home or whatever might be bothering you. Always, when you use God in any conversation, let it be a positive way. Let it be an upbeat way that helps them to know that I can always go to God. And God is always going to be my strength and my uplifter. That God's going to be my encourager. Always. What would I want out of my parents if I were a child today? I'd want some time with them. Time. Let me tell you something. I know parents today want to say, oh, okay, just baby, whatever you want, a new car, a new airplane, or whatever, I'll get it if I have to hawk the house. Children need your time more than they need anything else that you can give them. Oh, sure, they need food and substance and so forth. They need your time. They need to know that you love them enough that you're going to spend some time with them, irregardless of everybody else or anything else that might be a part of your life. They are so important that you're going to give up something else in order to spend time with them. I saw an interview with Kenny Rogers very much toward the end of his life, and they asked him this question: do you have any regrets? Now, you would think of a lot of things that a big star like that might have regrets for, and he said, I really only have one. I regret that I wasn't there for my children. I regret that I wasn't there for my children. And the man asked him, said, well, have you tried to restore your relationships with your children? He said, yes, I have. I've done my best, and we have a good relationship, but there's no way I can get back the time that we lost. I'll never have those years again. Time. Children need your time. You say, well, yeah, boy, parents, y'all need, listen, are you going to be a friend to your neighbor's kids? Give them some time. Let them know they're important to you. What about your nieces and nephews, your children's, your grandchildren's children? Give them, that is the most important gift you can give them. Oh, yeah, they're going to remember that $20 bill you give them at Christmas, sure, for about 2 days, till they can find something to spend it on. But when you take the time to spend with them, to talk to them, to do things with them, listen, their years as a child is so short, it's so tender. Have you ever seen a flower when it first comes up with shooting up a bloom? That stem is so fragile. A heavy thunderstorm can destroy it. It's so fragile that if you but just touch it or mash it a little bit, it just totally destroys it. Those years are like that in the youth of the children. They're so tender. They're so formidable. They're so elastic. They're so need to be handled with care. Nurture them. Savor them. Make it an important part of your life. One of the things I couldn't help but write down, and I remember when I was a kid growing up, of course, my grandparents raised me, Mama and Pop. I would want my parents to act like adults. Now, I know it's easy to think, well, boy, I need to, my child's going to really love me if I act like a child. No. Your children need adult parents. I see a lot of parents today who act more like children than their children do. We need parents to act like parents, to be responsible. If you're arguing like a bunch of kids between each other as adults, it scares those kids to death. Mama and Daddy, let me tell you something about Mom and Daddy. Have you ever tried to mix oil and water? Don't mix very well, does it? Mom and Pop was just as opposite as two poles of a magnet. And they were drawn to each other just about that way. Mom and Pop did love to argue. But until I was an adult, I never remember one time seeing them argue when I was still in school, when I was just a kid growing up. Now, I had to settle several arguments for them after I got to be an adult myself. We won't go into that. But as a child, how would I want my parents to act? I'd want my parents to act like adults themselves. If you got a problem, settle it apart from them. It scares them. They feel so insecure when they see you argue as parents with each other. Act like an adult. Let them see the pattern of an adult like it ought to be. Show them what an adult is supposed to act like. And by the way, let me share this with you right quick, because this is something that I've seen. Help those kids to understand that when they have problems in school, don't just automatically blame the teacher. Don't just automatically say, boy, if you had a better teacher, if your teacher was better to you. Don't let that happen. Try your best to go to that teacher. Try to settle whatever issues there may be with that, but uphold, support the security that they have in knowing. Now, there are times when you've got to deal with some issues with a teacher, but don't do it in such a way to make it seem to that child like they can act that way, that they can blame the teacher and get away with it. Don't let that be the case. I've seen it on both sides of the fence, not as a teacher, but as a bus driver. Be sure that you support every way you can their education through their teachers as they go back to school. If there is an issue, go to the teacher personally. Talk to that teacher. Don't just automatically side with the kid and let them get away with anything. Another thing that I wrote down that I remember so well as I've watched kids today, don't expect kids to listen to what you say and ignore what you do. It ain't happening. Kids will learn infinitely more by what you do than they will by what you say. They'll remember your example a long time after they've forgotten your advice. Your kids are going to watch what you do, and they're going to follow what you do. Have you ever seen a child walk behind his daddy trying to step in the same footprints that his daddy made? Listen, there's a whole lot to that. There's a whole lot to that. Remember, you need to act like an adult. You need to grow up. You need to let them see an adult and how an adult is supposed to be. Practice what you preach. Show them in action what you tell them about moral values and about spiritual values. Teach them yourself about sexual matters and behaviors. Don't wait to some teacher to teach them something about sex education. That's your job. You should be able to talk to them about things such as that and help them to know the dangers that are out there, more so by far than they ever were when I was growing up. Teach them about what God, their Maker, has to say about their bodies and about their sexual behavior. For my sake as a child, I would want to have been taught by my parents to avoid premarital sex. But you know what? You've got to act that way yourself. Dads, if you're flirting around and smiling as you should not be with other women besides their mom, they're going to pick up on it. If you joke about sexual matters to them, they're going to take it just as humorously as you do. We need to teach our kids about the dangers and the pitfalls that await for them. I've seen far too many young adults fall into horrible traps that Satan has set before them simply because those kids didn't know how to behave. Your child is never going to learn the sanctity of their body and of behaving themselves with their bodies properly if you're doing the very things that God says for us not to do. If you're flirting around as if you'd like to have extramarital sex, then you're not going to be able to get through to them about why not to have premarital sex. So many things we need to be careful to teach our children. One of the main things that I wrote down was teach your children to go to church. Teach your children to go to church. You say, preacher, that's not important. Think back. Think back to your own childhood. Think back to your own upraising. Think back to how important it was then is infinitely much more important today. Why? Because that's where they make so many connections with God. Through Sunday school, through children's programs, through ways that the teachers teach them. It's critical to get into their minds and into their hearts. Take them. Don't send them to church. Take them to church. Let them see you participating in Sunday school and worship. When they grow up, they're going to take whatever you teach them by example to another level. If you took them to church once in a while when they were growing up, they're probably not going to hardly go at all, if at all, when they do grow up. We force our kids to go to school 5 days a week. And then on Sunday morning, we start trying to find out a way not to have to go to church. What's wrong with that picture? What's wrong with that picture? Son, you got to go to church. Darling, you got to go to church. You got to go to school. Get up now, let's go. We got to go, we got to go, we got to go. And on Sunday morning, oh, I don't feel too good today. Well, yeah, I guess let's just go riding around a little while today. What are your children going to think? How important is God to you? Their thoughts are going to be so different. They're going to think, well, school's important. Yeah, that's good to teach. Thank you. But you've just taught them that God's not. God's not that important. Anything else I can think of that might could help me to stay out of church today? is more important than God is. Realize that your children are not little adults. Let them be kids. Let them grow up. They're going to grow up soon enough in this old wicked society we've got. And our society literally forces our kids to grow up faster, even more so than I did when I was growing up. Kids need to play like. They need to have an imagination. You need to encourage that imagination. Let them pretend. Give them time to do it. Let them be creative. Let them be children. You know, I know you've heard this so many times. I just got to say it one more time. The worst thing a child can do is spend hours with a television, spend hours with a video game where they don't have to have any imagination. Everything's just laid out there for them. I know it's easy to do. It's easy when you can just set them in front of the TV and turn it on and walk away and let them watch some old silly, ugly cartoon. You don't know what they're getting. Choose carefully. Choose carefully. There's some good things on TV. There's some good things that they can watch. But kids need to learn for themselves. Pediatricians tell us, experts tell us, that kids have to hear about 10,000 words before they can form one that you can understand coming from them. Does it make a difference what they hear on TV or in some video game? It is critical to their development. It's critical. Read to your kids. You know what? That's a wonderful time you can spend with your children. They need those stories. I still remember to this day how wonderful I would feel when Miss Richardson, my teacher in the first grade at Palmetto, she'd get that old book out about Uncle Remus and those kind of stories. And I can remember my mind would immediately take off, boy. When she'd talk about, these 3 bears living in a cave or whatever, man, I could just see that thing in my mind. I heard her. She read so beautifully anyway. And my whole mind would be consumed with what she was saying. My imagination had time to express itself. They need to hear stories. Read to them Bible stories. Bible stories. Stories about Jesus. Reading is 10,000 times more educational for your children than anything television or Hollywood's got to offer. Now I'm going to say something else. I'm done. The best way that you can help fix this wicked, rotten society of ours is to prepare your children to take control of it. Don't let them go out there unprepared. Don't let them go out there without their bags packed with good things of God, healthy things to help them know how to behave. Be selective with what you let go into their brains and into their minds. Be selective. Choose carefully what you let them have in their lives. Spend time with them. And I mean spend time with them sometimes just spontaneously, unplanned. That shows them just how important it is that they are to you. Spend time with them. Time when it's just you and them. Please help us. Help the world. Help society. Why can't our children grow up with a decent world to live in? My generation has done a very poor job. Let's develop a generation that can do a lot better. All of this mess that we see on TV, all of this stuff that we watch, all of this stuff that we get so sick and tired of seeing doesn't have to continue. It doesn't have to continue. I can't do anything about it. Yes. When you raise that child, when you have a part of that child's life, when you invest your time and yourself into them, you can make a difference. You're going to make a difference. One of the things that makes me as angry, I guess, as most anything, and we're going to deal with it this year, when we blame our children for wanting to pass some kind of gambling bill. The most horrible sin of covetousness there is in the world. I want something somebody else has got, and I want it for nothing. They've learned it well. Alexander Shannara has made millions off of the attitude getting something for nothing, getting something undeserved. The gambling bill is nothing more than blaming our children for our own desire to sin because we say we're doing it so we can educate our children. If we're really responsible, then we'll take responsibility for our children's education. We'll do what it takes to support our teachers and our school systems. We won't pass that off to somebody else. Oh, don't blame your kids' education if you're trying to get a lottery bill passed. You better be talking to God about yourself. Finally, Jesus, my Savior, born in a stable. Boy, that's a terrible thing, wouldn't it? Let me tell you what, when it comes to love, that stable was a palace. How about your house? How about your house? It's tough to look at that old stable and think, no, listen, Mary and Joseph loved that baby. God himself loved that baby as he does your own child. Old Solomon says, better is a dinner of herbs than a dinner of filet steaks if love is there. How true. Every one of us is in the house furnishing business. How are you furnishing your house? Are you furnishing your house with love? Are you furnishing your house with time for your children? Are you furnishing your house to help those children grow up to be what they ought to be, to know the Lord? Remember, before there was a government, there was a home. I'm going to ask you a simple question. Today, is your house a castle or a catastrophe? Let's stand. Father, our children are inevitably, in the next few days, unless Jesus comes again, going to find themselves back into the school system. And no matter what their school is, no matter who their teacher is, no matter what their subjects have to be and so forth, they're going to face so many challenges. They're going to face challenges, Lord, like I've really never even been aware of. I've thought a lot this week, God, about what it would be like to be one of those teenagers walking the hall of a school where instead of being popular, to be chaste in our behavior, it's unpopular and they're made fun of, especially little girls if they're still a virgin by the time they're 15, 16 years old. What it would be like to walk outside the school doors and be met with other kids pushing drugs for some old drug dealer that sees them as nothing more than a way for him to make money and support his own drug habit. Those things, God, were not there when I grew up. If I were one of those children, I'd want to have parents who cared enough to make sure that I knew how to behave because they had shown me by example how to behave. Oh, how I pray, Lord, for our adults, parents, and the adults who have influence of any kind on any child, anywhere, anytime. Help us to seek out children even, Lord, that we might help in some way or fashion or other. Help us, God, as a church to care enough that we will reach out into our school systems to try and make sure that they're provided with whatever their needs might be in order to properly educate our children, and help us to fight like a real, true warrior for your word to be into their hearts and into their minds and into their lives. Help us, God, to stand tall when it comes to being a Christian. Lord, those fools in France who this week were making jest and making fun of Christians when they were really just charged only to celebrate the opening of the Olympics, who took an opportunity to take a stab at the greatest organization in the world, and that is the Christian church. For those fools who themselves choose not to believe in God, today, Lord, have mercy on them. I pray that you would touch their hearts with somebody who might tell them of the love of Christ that they obviously know nothing about. Help us as Christians, God, to stand against those things in a Christ-like way and teach our children the horrors of the lifestyle that they're trying to inject into our children's lives. I pray for our school teachers, bus drivers, custodians, lunchroom workers, anyone who, God, especially in the leadership of our schools, have anything to do with educating our children. Help us not just send them and forget them, but to be involved in their schools, to see what they're being taught, to know who's teaching them, and to make sure that they're giving proper reverence there to their teachers and to their leaders, and then that their teachers and leaders are doing their job the way they properly should be. Go with us as we leave here today now, Lord, and walk with us and go with us and show us opportunities wherein we can be involved in a greater way as we face this new year and the school year for our children. Now I pray, Lord, as we go into revival at Crossroads, God, I pray for the Crossroads Church and the folks there. I pray that you'll take us there with a great message for you, that their church will be revived and that things will be brought into a closer walk with you now in Christ's name. Amen.